If you are a Jimmy Dore fan, know that I was once one as well. I used to think that he was the best left liberal news commentator on YouTube because despite his errors and shortcomings, nothing up to that point seems reasonably damning about him. Jimmy Dore is in the right on many issues, from rejecting the Democrats to force the vote to his anti-imperialist agitation and so on. To me, he seems like a very passionate, genuine person who cares about the issues, and that many of his faults and shortcomings could largely be attributed to his own short attention span, liberal naivete, and lack of leftist theory. It wasn't until I was first made aware of his dishonesty that I began to fact-check him and immediately lost all respect for Jimmy Dore, and quickly came to revile him as an anti-establishment grifter whom rides the waves of populism, capitalizing on people's fear, outrage, and real grievances with the system for his own personal gain. And if you are a Jimmy Dore fan, know that nobody is above criticism and that we all have a duty to call out the bullshit of others, even when that bullshit is manifesting within the ranks of people whom we uphold as speakers for the broader movement. Because if we don't call it out, we fall prey to the same liberalism and opportunism which many like to condemn the breadtube crowd over. Some will argue that Dore isn't anti-vaccine, he's just anti-mandate. The issue with that is that the stance is extremely contradictory. So let me get this straight. You got the vaccine for the obvious reason that the benefits outweigh the drawbacks, and yet you're going to sit here and fearmonger about its dangers while making vague, bad faith appeals to freedom and liberty? What freedoms are people losing out on exactly by being made to get vaccinated? The freedom to not get sick and die from a deadly disease? The only reason that Dore may advise that you get the vaccine personally, and say that he individually got it so that he can A, avoid getting deplatformed by YouTube for being overtly anti-vax, and B, avoid taking responsibility for the fact that in recent months, his channel has become a non-stop venue churning out anti-vaccine propaganda. It's like saying that though I personally wear condoms when I go to parties, having casual sex with strangers to protect myself from contracting an STI or knocking someone up, though I might occasionally advise people to practice protected sex, at the same time, I will declare it's an issue of personal liberty and do a slew of polemics as to why people shouldn't be required to wear condoms because 1 in several thousand people are allergic to the rubber, and that since they don't provide 100% protection from disease and pregnancy, that it is therefore futile to wear them, and that people have a right to not wear a condom, despite all the documented benefits to the individual and the community in preventing the spread of STIs and unwanted pregnancy. On top of me telling you that any public health campaigns or advertisements advertising the apparent benefits of condoms or advising that you wear a condom is just a ploy by Big Trojan to sell you more condoms. Not too long ago, OG breadtuber Sean made a video exposing Jimmy Dore's anti-vax propaganda, showcasing his frivolous flip-flopping on the issue, why he's had a sudden change of heart this year, when last year he was aggressively criticizing the governments for failing to provide access to the vaccine, and how Dore twisted the words of a Fortune article reporting on a study in Singapore showcasing how despite having amongst the highest vaccination rates in the world, the country is also seeing large surges in new COVID cases. As pointed out by Sean, Dore neglects to mention the positive effects of the vaccine while honing in on the segments of the article which reaffirm his bias.
And this video from Dore is a real masterclass in misleading an audience. And to see what Dore does here, we're going to read this article along with him and see how he represents it. So, the article starts out, highly vaccinated Singapore is battling a record wave of COVID-19 infections just as the city plans to reopen to the world. But Singapore's 80% vaccination rate has kept severe cases and deaths down, potentially proving that living with the virus versus trying to eradicate it is the surest path out of the pandemic. Now, here's how Jimmy Dore starts reading the article.
On Monday, Singapore recorded 1,647 cases of COVID-19, bringing its 7-day daily average to 1,545 cases, higher than any other previous wave of the pandemic.
So what he did there was skip the first paragraph, the one that states that Singapore's high vaccination rate has kept severe cases and deaths down, and he started reading at the second paragraph talking about the recent increase in COVID cases. So he's avoided mentioning the positive effects of the high vaccination rate there. But let's not draw any conclusions right now. So, following this sentence read out by Dore, the article says, but even as cases soar, COVID-19 deaths in Singapore have remained low. The city-state of 5.7 million people has averaged 3 deaths per day in the last week. Singapore's saving grace is its high vaccination coverage. So let's hear Jimmy read that.
And they're super vaccinated in Singapore. We're going to find experts say Singapore's climbing cases, more than half of which are in vaccinated individuals.
Hang on, where is he? Oh, he skipped down to here, the sentence that starts out, experts say that Singapore's climbing cases and so on. So that's twice now that he's skipped mentioning the positive effects of vaccination. Now, the sentence following this one also mentions Singapore's low death rate. It says, as long as deaths remain low, Singapore can set an example for how other countries, especially those that have maintained zero tolerance for COVID-19, can emerge from the pandemic. So let's listen to Jimmy read that.
Singapore has now fully vaccinated over 80% of its population, one of the highest rates in the world.
No, he's gone again. Now he's back up here, having expertly dodged multiple separate instances of the article directly praising Singapore's high vaccination rate.
The rest of the video is a brilliant expose. I highly recommend giving it a watch. And so in response to being called out by Sean for deliberately misrepresenting the article, Dore does what any career news commentator and analyst, I use that term loosely, would do in his shoes. He blames his editor for it, directly throwing them under the bus and firing them while skirting all responsibility for his actions.
But when you look at the original source material, it is abundantly clear that the graphic was edited in a way to send a message that was that was the antithesis of what was actually reported in the source material at Fortune. So I give you that context because the evidence was so overwhelming that Jimmy Dore had no option but to correct himself on air. And then, look, I respect corrections, clearly, right? So if he had corrected himself, despite all the other vaccine disinformation content that he's put out there, I would have given him credit for taking personal responsibility and correcting the record. But that is not what he did. He decided to blame his producer and then proceeded to say that his producer was stupid and sloppy and that he fired this producer.
Jimmy Dore has frequently misrepresented the news on this subject, cherry-picking segments of articles and studies, fabricating their conclusions, and leaving out any context or information which directly contradicts his anti-vaccine, anti-mandate propaganda. Just recently I did a live reaction to Jimmy Dore's debate with Graham Elwood, where in it they have a live back-and-forth discussion about the mandate. In it, Dore frequently makes appeals to futility, anti-establishment appeals, and gish gallops, aka shotgunning as much information at his opponents as humanly possible as to overwhelm the opposition with more data than they can possibly hope to respond to and refute in a reasonable amount of time within the context of a live debate. The following are a series of excerpts from my live reaction to this debate where I provide commentary and fact-check Jimmy Dore in real time.
Vulnerable to the virus, you should get vaccinated. And because it will prevent you from serious disease or illness most of the time, not all the time. So that's what we tell people. Now, the big reason the only reason I can see why you would want someone else to get vaccinated is because you would think we could, vaccinate our way out of this pandemic, and we can't. Now, everyone agrees with that now. You can't vaccinate, and that's what Dr. Robert Malone said on this show a couple of months ago when he said, you can't vaccinate your way out of a pandemic like this, and you can't do it with a leaky vaccine. And what does a leaky vaccine mean? That means that even if you get vaccinated, you can still transmit the virus, and you can still contract it. And in fact, this is what the FDA says. This is from November 21st, last time I looked it up. It says, does the vaccine stop the spread of the disease? It says most vaccines that protect from viral illnesses also reduce transmission of the virus that causes the disease by those who are vaccinated. While it is hoped this will be the case, the scientific community does not yet know if the Pfizer-BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine will reduce such transmission, and that's from the FDA.
The article which Jimmy Google food here is from a few months ago. If you ask Google if the Pfizer vaccine works, you get some degree of mixed responses as it is a new vaccine and some time needs to pass for the scientific community to make observations. Needless to say, on the CDC's website, they will tell you boldly to your face that the vaccines are effective at not only protecting against the virus, but they also slow the spread of it as well, on top of inhibiting its rates of mutation when compared to unvaccinated populaces. Although it is true that vaccinated people can still transmit the virus, they do so at a significantly slower rates relative to the unvaccinated. The CDC will also tell you that the benefits greatly outweigh the potential risks, and that the side effects are normal and will go away within a few days' time, and that adverse effects such as myocarditis are rare. Now, if you don't trust the CDC, that's okay. The actual data that they're referencing hails from a growing number of studies which are showing a repeated pattern vindicating these findings. Occasionally, you will get research which might contradict this growing plurality of data, but so far, the vast majority of evidence valorizes the conclusion that vaccines work.
And here it is. The WHO says vaccine booster programs will prolong COVID crisis. No country can boost its way out of this pandemic.
Booster campaigns will prolong pandemic, the WHO warns. World Health Organization called on industrialized governments to place a moratorium on vaccinating healthy adults with boosters and instead donate those jabs to poorer countries, warning vaccine inequality could prolong the pandemic and needlessly result in further deaths. So what they're actually saying is that we need to export these vaccines to the third world because they desperately need it. Only about 5% of the population in the low-income countries is fully vaccinated, while in the wealthiest 20 nations have hoarded 80% of the supply for themselves. So this is just one example of what I'm talking about. Dores singles out the headlines of the article to try and say that the World Health Organization is suggesting that the vaccine will prolong the pandemic. That is, mass vaccination will do more harm than good. However, as I showcase in the article, what they're actually saying is that the first world should hold off on getting vaccinated until the third world is able to raise their own vaccination rates, and that due to the first world's hoarding of its vaccines and patents, that the third world lags behind. And thus, we should put a moratorium on the mandate back at home and instead prioritize getting as many vaccines to the third world as possible, since it is in the under-vaccinated populations where new variants are most likely to emerge and spread. They're not saying we shouldn't carry out the mandate, and yet that is exactly what this piece of shit Jimmy Dore is trying to imply via his lying by omission. You'll see here in a sec.
Iceland joins Sweden and Denmark in pause the jab. Here's in Canada, some Albertans asked to turn down the Moderna vaccine. Alberta's top doctor is recommending that those aged 12 to 29 avoid the Moderna COVID-19 vaccine. How many people get the myocarditis?
A rare side effect. Approximately one case of myocarditis is found per 7,000 doses in 12 to 17-year-old males with Pfizer, and one case per 2,000 second doses of the
One case of myocarditis is found per 7,000 doses in 12 to 17-year-old males with Pfizer. One case per 2,000 doses with the Moderna.
Danish health authority says it made the decision even as heart inflammation is an extremely rare side effect that often has a mild course and goes away on its own. EMA Safely Committee concluded in July that inflammatory heart conditions can occur in very rare cases following vaccination. The benefits of shots based on the so-called mRNA technology used by both Moderna and Pfizer in preventing COVID-19 continue to outweigh the risks, regulators in the United States, EU, and World Health Organization have said. Data suggests reported cases of rare heart inflammation are relatively higher after Moderna's vaccine compared to Pfizer. Although both vaccines based on mRNA technology, the Pfizer shot contains 30 micrograms of vaccine per dose compared to 100 micrograms of Moderna. Data from one of the two U.S. vaccine safety monitoring databases has also suggested that Moderna vaccine may carry a higher risk of myocarditis. The vaccine is not approved for people under age 18 in the United States. Norway already recommends the Comirnaty vaccine to minors. Okay, so they're just recommending a different vaccine for this reason, to accommodate this rare condition which is caused as a complication following the vaccine. So there you go. You just create a vaccine for younger age groups that don't pose the same risks. Quoting that last passage one more time, quote, Norway already recommends the Comirnaty vaccine to minors and said on Wednesday that it was reiterating this, unquote. Once again, in the very article that Dore references, the experts are still stressing that we administer the vaccine as the benefits colossally outweigh the drawbacks, and this is a persistent trend. In many of the articles that Dore is shotgunning here, they suggest something similar, and yet here he is, once again, lying by omission.
Of dying. Graham, no, that's not the point. And let me make my point, and then I'll give it to you. I'm going to hand it to you. So now they're even admitting in the USA Today that a guy died as a direct result from myocarditis from the vaccine. So, and now we have, so I don't know how you can, I'm not saying, Ken, you can judge whether the risk is worth taking if you think the risk from the vaccine is lower.
As highlighted in the live stream, over 800,000 people are dead from COVID here in the United States. A number which is likely underreported, as the actual death toll is likely well over 1 million at this point, and Jimmy Dore is going to single out the one guy who died in New Zealand from myocarditis following a vaccine, a side effect that the title of the article itself admits is rare. Again, the experts are saying in article after article, which Dore himself is referencing to prove his points, that the benefits of the vaccine massively outweigh the drawbacks, as they not only reduce the period of symptoms and rate of transmissions, not only do they reduce mortality rates, they also help to stifle the mutation rates of the virus as well, reducing the number of diversified strains from emerging in adults without the vaccine. And mind you, As stated by one of my subscribers in the chat of that live stream, health complications following the vaccine are also caused by the vaccine being misadministered in patients, that is, being injected into the bloodstream as opposed to the muscle, and that proper administration would go a long way in curtailing these side effects, i.e., injecting into the skeletal muscle. Lastly, let's review some of Dores' main arguments and go over some of the more fallacious elements within them. The central point of Dores' thesis is an appeal to futility, or the notion that COVID is never going to go away, vaccine or not, and that because of this, alongside the fact that the vaccine does carry some potential health risks, and because freedoms, people shouldn't have to adhere to a vaccine mandate. Dore argues that the mandate is authoritarian, puts people's lives at risk, and isn't worth it anyway since COVID is now endemic. Finally, Dore has also argued that the mandate is a ploy by Big Pharma to reap massive profits via the mass production and inoculation of the vaccine. We'll return to that last argument in a moment. For now, let's recap. As demonstrated thus far, Dore has misrepresented article after article, repeatedly lying by omission, and on top of that, has platformed snake oil salesmen like Robert Malone, who as of now has a suspended Twitter for repeated COVID misinformation violations, and claims to be the inventor of the mRNA technology used in the Moderna and Pfizer vaccines. And on top of that, none of the arguments made by Dore are substantiated by the data, nor do they make any kind of sense objectively. Like many demagogues, he starts with his conclusion and works backwards from there in his analysis, which is the opposite of science. Returning to the point on Big Pharma and the ruling class benefiting from mass vaccination and the mandate, again, Dore argues almost in a conspiratorial manner that the powers that be are trying to push the vaccine on people for sinister reasons, and that they stand heavily to gain by undermining people's freedoms and profiting off of the production and distribution of the vaccine. Couple of points. First off, whether or not producing and distributing a vaccine is profitable for the pharmaceutical industry is irrelevant. Occasionally, the capitalist system's profit motive is tangentially related to human need. Just because the fulfillment of that human need happens to be profitable doesn't inherently make it detrimental. Profits aren't inherently a bad thing. It is what is done to acquire them that is the problem. And is Big Pharma researching and churning out vaccines which can potentially save lives a form of ill-gotten gains? Well, not necessarily. The second point is this. When one takes a global look at the pandemic, the truth is that it is not at all profitable to produce and distribute the vaccine. As alluded to earlier, the vaccine is only made and sold in rich countries which can actually afford to pay for it. First world governments buy up these vaccines in bulk at a negotiated price and then distribute them to the public, since if people had to buy the medication themselves directly, if it was left up to Big Pharma, then they would easily be heavily marking up the prices of their vaccine doses. On the other hand, third world nations not only don't have the money to purchase these vaccines, they also don't have a means to distribute them efficiently either. And due to patent laws, third world countries are forbidden from synthesizing their own vaccines based off of the blueprints of Pfizer, Moderna, and Johnson & Johnson, and thus, these nations are stuck having to reinvent the wheel, making their own derivatives and variations of the vaccine. Even under the instances where the first world has delivered surplus vaccines to the third world, such as when the US dumped a bunch of Johnson & Johnson vaccines in Africa due to the sheer volume of people refusing to take it, they were on the verge of expiring by the time of arrival. Plus, according to the World Health Organization, less than 10% of African countries hit their vaccination goals, a number constituting at least 40% of the population. So the first world is hoarding and wasting vaccines on people who refuse to take them, while at the same time callously denying most of the planet's population living at or below the equator access to the vaccine, not because there isn't enough to go around, but because it simply is not profitable to distribute according to need. On one hand, we have the first world, where people are so pampered and spoiled that they have the privilege to make-believe whatever they want about the pandemic and actively refuse the vaccine to the detriment of themselves and their neighbors, while on the other hand, we have the second and third world, where billions of people desperately need the vaccine but either can't afford to import it, are forbidden from synthesizing their own due to arbitrary patent laws, or are sanctioned by the US government and couldn't purchase the vaccine if they wanted to. This is the real angle of the situation which commentators like Dores should be tackling this from. Instead, they flip-flop, half-heartedly tell you that though they have the vaccines themselves, they will then fearmonger about its side effects, treating it like it's an issue of individual freedom and personal liberty, distorting and obfuscating what the experts have to say about it, playing on people's fears and paranoia, as well as anti-establishment sentiments for its own sake as to grift profits off of uninformed, impressionable, and easily influenced people. As stated before at the beginning of this video, about a year ago, Dore was more than enthusiastic about the production and distribution of the vaccine according to need. So much so, it almost seems as though he was pro-vax mandate at the time.
She wants to make the vaccines affordable. Yes. What kind of, you have to have a virus in your brain to think that, hey, we could, well, here's what I said. Of course, we could distribute the vaccine to all citizens as soon as it's available and stop a pandemic, but we're not filthy socialists, so lots of people are going to die. That's what she's saying. A functioning government would fucking inoculate its citizenry against a goddamn pandemic and forget about a fucking profit motive.
A few moments later.
So if the vaccine, if you could still get it, still transmit it, and we're all gonna get it, and you can also get protection if you, natural immunity once you get it, because tens of millions of people have already had it in the United States, and now they have natural immunity, and they're saying if you get it, so if you can get all those things, I don't think you should be able to mandate a vaccine that's super authoritarian, and I also believe lockdowns are authoritarian, but I'll stop there.
Everything that could have been done to stop the virus then or to combat the virus now runs perpendicular to the needs of the ruling class in the capitalist system. And the line that these anti-vax demagogues are towing is far more in line with the ruling class interests than is the position of the pro-mandate/lockdown crowd, which, if properly enacted, would greatly benefit the commons. Instead of treating the pandemic like the public health issue that it is, they invoke conspiracy and frame the discussion as though it is an issue of personal liberty and freedom from big government, when nothing could be further from the truth. And charlatans like Jimmy Dore only say that they're in favor of the vaccine on an individual level as a means to save face, open themselves up to plausible deniability, inject nuance, trademark, and dodge taking responsibility for their actions. All of a sudden, whenever he gets called out for deliberately misrepresenting studies and news articles or platforming anti-vax grifters on a regular basis, Dore, along with his parasocially brainwashed sycophants, can simply point to XYZ clip from one of his live streams ABC, where he says that you should consider maybe getting the vaccine personally, bro. All of a sudden, despite the dozens of videos up on his channel where he delivers COVID misinformation, his fans have all the ammunition needed to cope and say, yeah, well, he's only anti-mandate, bro. He's not anti-vax. Look at this clip where he says you should probably consider getting the vaccine, bro. Despite his advocacy and his content functionally being anti-vax propaganda, the fear-mongering and concern-trolling Dore is now doing against so-called authoritarianism is not only peak liberalism, being very much in line with American right-wing paranoia and hysteria, it is once again homogeneous with the needs of the current system to stay opened up so that the circulation of commodities may continue and the exploitation of labor power may persist. Jimmy Dore and the rest of these anti-vax charlatans who claim to be anti-establishment news media are in practice carrying water for the establishment in a sense, since their view, the vaccine mandate is authoritarian, it's futile, it evidently does more harm than good, and the same goes for lockdowns apparently. The logical conclusion of this rhetoric can only be the unabated opening up of our economy, the laxing of COVID restrictions, and the mere rolling of the punches, so to speak. A lot of people are going to get sick, a lot of people are going to die, but in Dore's own words, we're all going to get sick with it sooner or later anyways, and the mandate will do more harm than good. So herd immunity it is, right? What a coincidence that Dore's advocacy is incredibly homogeneous with the current solution that is being carried out here in the United States. In this way, Dore and the rest of the anti-vax charlatans have cloaked their reactionary propaganda in a veneer of anti-establishment populism, and the current censorship taking place against anti-vaxxers on social media feeds into their paranoia as well as their narrative that the system is cracking down and has it out for them, and that they're the real resistance. It's just another way in which the real concerns and genuine grievances resonating with the people are co-opted by right-wing undercurrents and transmuted into something which fundamentally poses no sort of threat to power. Don't worry, however, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that everyone's in on this grand conspiracy. While there's always the slim chance that Dore, the Gray Zone, and the rest of these pseudo-populist opportunists are part of a larger psyop, the actual answer is much simpler than that. As easy as it is to point the finger and accuse somebody of being a Fed, the truth is that Jimmy Dore is just an anti-establishment grifter who is in the process of expanding his outreach and platform to a more right-wing audience, growing his subscriber count, and profiteering off of the non-stop validation of people's fears, paranoia, and anti-establishment sentiments. People don't watch Jimmy Dore to be educated. They watch him because he gets them excited. He whips the crowd up into a frenzy and tells people what they want to hear.